This is Top Accolade Global News Updates. I am Soybifa Jakarich. China on Wednesday launched a satellite that will act as a communication bridge between ground operations on Earth and an upcoming mission on the far side of the moon, marking a new phase in the country's long-term lunar exploration program. A Long March 8 rocket carrying the 1.2 metric ton Chuechia-2, named after a mythological bridge made of magpies, and two miniature satellites, Tiandu 1 and 2, blasted off from the southern island province of Hainan, state media reported. The moon's near side always faces Earth. That means data transfers from the far side are impossible as there is no direct line of sight. Chuechia-2 will orbit the moon and relay signals to and from the Change 6 mission, expected to be launched in May. The robotic Change 6 mission will seek to retrieve samples from an ancient basin, acquiring lunar materials from the moon's hidden side for the first time. The constellation will also provide communications, navigating and remote sensing support for China's research station planned for the moon's south pole. Chuechia-2 will join half a dozen orbiters deployed by other countries, including the United States, India, and Japan. The satellite is expected to enter an orbit that passes close to moon's south pole, where China will construct its research outposts. Chuechia-2's orbit will be highly elliptical, reaching as high as 8,600 kilometers above its surface and enabling a communication link between Earth and the moon for more than 8 hours, wrote its designer Zhang Lihao in a 2021 article in the journal Space, Science and Technology. For the remainder of its roughly 12-hour orbit, Chuechia-2 will be as low as 300 kilometers above the lunar surface. The International Monetary Fund on Wednesday said it had reached a staff-level agreement with Pakistan, which, if approved by its board, will disburse $1.1 billion for the indebted South Asian economy, and also saddled with a balance of payment crisis. The funds are the final tranche of a $3 billion last gaps rescue package Pakistan had secured last summer, which averted a sovereign debt default. Islamabad is also seeking another long-term bailouts. The IMF team has reached a staff-level agreement with the Pakistani authorities on the second and final review of Pakistan's stabilization program, the IMF said in a statement. This agreement is subject to approval by the IMF Executive Board. It added, the agreement expires on April 11th, and while Pakistan has yet to be added to the IMF Executive Board's calendar, officials say board approval is expected sometime in April. The deal comes after the IMF mission held 5 days of talks with Pakistani officials to review the fiscal consolidation benchmarks set for the loan. However, growth is expected to be modest this year and inflation remains well above targets as Pakistan needs more policy reforms to address its economic vulnerabilities, the leader added. Most Pakistan dollar bonds traded higher on Wednesday. The 2027 maturing bond was up 0.25 cents at 83.957 cents on the dollar, while the 2025 bond, which was up 0.21 cents at 92.023 cents on the dollar. British inflation cooled in February by slightly more than economists and the Bank of England had expected, paving the way for interest rate cuts in the months ahead. Consumer prices rose by a slightly weaker than expected 3.4% in annual terms in February, slowing from a 4.0% increase in January and the lowest rate of inflation since September 2021. The Office for National Statistics said on Wednesday, food and selling prices in eateries were the biggest downward drags, offset by an upward contribution from motor fuels. Core inflation, which excludes energy, food, and tobacco prices, also slowed to 4.5%, down from 5.1% in January. The figures were published on the day that the BOE's interest rate setters are due to vote on borrowing costs. The announcement of their March policy decision is due at 12:00 GMT on Thursday. Investors slightly increased bets that BOE will start cutting interest rates in August. Sterling was little changed. Inflation situation is no more persistent than the BOE expected and is moving in line with the path that the BOE has hinted would warrant interest rate cuts. Paves, chief UK economist at Capital Economics, said. 7 inflation, which the BOE watches closely, slowed to 6.1% from 6.5% in January, as the central bank had expected last month. The Biden administration said it is awarding Intel nearly $20 billion in grants and loans on Wednesday, surcharging the company's domestic semiconductor chip output and marking the government's largest outlay to subsidize leading-edge chip production. Biden will announce the preliminary agreement for $8.5 billion in grants and up to $11 billion in loans for Intel in Arizona, with some of the funding to be used to build 2 new factories and modernize an existing one. Commerce Department Secretary Gina Raimondo called it a huge deal and one of the largest investments ever in U.S. semiconductor manufacturing. The goal is to reduce reliance on China and Taiwan, as the share of global semiconductor manufacturing capacity in the U.S. has fallen from 37% in 1990 to 12% in 2020. According to the Semiconductor Industry Association, the historic outlay showed the Biden administration is betting big on Intel as part of the 2022 Chips and Science Act, a bid to boost domestic semiconductor output with $52.7 billion in funding, including $39 billion in subsidies for semiconductor production and $11 billion for research and development. Commerce is dedicating $28 billion for government subsidies for chips manufacturing, although it has more than $70 billion in request and also has $75 billion in lending authority. The announcement in Arizona could also help Democrats defend a critical U.S. Senate seat in the November elections and possibly provide a boost in a pair of competitive House of Representatives race. Arizona was a point of pride for Biden's 2020 campaign, which flipped the southwestern state for the first time in 6 presidential elections, but his aides sealed delivery a repeat victory as a tall order. A United Nations mission set up to help Iraq investigate alleged Islamic State genocide and war crimes is being forced to shut prematurely before it can finish its probes following a souring of its relationship with the Iraqi government. The removal of UN mission set up in 2017 comes nearly a decade after the extremist group rampaged across Syria and at a time when many of Islamic State's victims still live displaced in camps and long for justice. Rich Shah was speaking at length about closure for the first time since the UN Security Council in September renewed the agency mandate for only one final year of Iraq's requests. UNITAD's international backers and donors had expected its work would continue for several more years. Critics of Iraq's decision to end the mission say it will hamper efforts to hold more members of IS accountable after UNITAD contributed to at least 3 convictions on charges of genocide and other international crimes in Germany and Portugal. They also say it cast doubt in Iraq's commitment to holding IS members accountable for such crimes at home, at a time when the vast majority of convictions in Iraq are made for simple membership of a terrorist organization rather than specific crimes such as sexual abuse or slavery. That is the size of top accolade global news updates. You can follow us on our social media platforms as displayed on your screen. Happy Wednesday.